This is a Best in Climate episode of Earth Feels, where each week your hosts Rose and Christine read to you from some of the best climate-related blogs and articles on the web.
Hey there, it's Rose with this week's Best in Climate. As we head into COP26 this week, I believe we can all envision the future that scientists tell us is awaiting us. The future that exists if humanity doesn't limit greenhouse gas emissions, doesn't stop denigrating our oceans and forests, doesn't stop our endless extraction from Earth in our endless quest for more stuff. It's what's keeping many of us awake at night. But to once again reiterate the basic premise of this podcast, what if climate change is happening for us as much as to us? We know another reality can exist. There is a world our hearts know is possible. And like everything else that has ever been created by man, this new world begins with our thoughts, our dreamings, and our imaginings. In answer to this morning's meditative question, where do we begin? The universe presented me with this week's Best in Climate by Mary Anais Heglar. If you're unfamiliar with Mary, well, do yourself a favor. She's a brilliant writer and the host, along with Amy Westerfelt, of the podcast Hot Take. Her coverage on the climate crisis is extraordinary, and I can only hope her voice hits your heart as it does mine. As always, I'll include links to some of her works and to Hot Take. So here's Mary Anais Heglar's To Build a Beautiful World, You First Have to Imagine It. It's been a heavy week for those of us who want to preserve the earth. Somehow, the latest, greatest hope for a livable future is in the hands of one man, a senator, not even a king. Given how few Americans voted for him, it's absurd that Joe Manchin has so much national influence. But when you factor in the scale of U.S. power and its historic and current responsibility for the climate crisis, it's downright grotesque. When Senator Ed Markey joined climate activists outside of the Capitol on October 7th, he said, quote, "There's no middle ground between a livable and an unlivable world," end quote. But there is a world in between, and we're in it now. It's a world where everything feels tenuous, like if you touch anything, it might all crumble. It's one where you feel uneasy making plans months in advance because you can't picture the future. Today, coming up with a 10-year plan feels ridiculous, like building a house on quicksand. As we careen from crisis to crisis, it's hard not to wonder whether the world is ending. But for the only species with a record, for better or worse, of intentionally changing the planet, that's a cop-out. The real question isn't what the world is doing. It's about what we're doing. It's not whether the world is ending or beginning. It's whether we're creating or destroying it. And the answer is, of course, both. The climate crisis is a crisis of many things: science, economics, politics, immigration. As the author Amitav Ghosh said, quote, "The climate crisis is also a crisis of culture, and thus of the imagination." To be clear, that doesn't mean innovation or invention. We've got loads of ideas for solar panels and microgrids. While we have all of these pieces, we don't have a picture of how they come together to build a new world. For too long, the climate fight has been limited to scientists and policy experts, While we need those skills, we also need so much more. When I survey the field, it's clear that what we desperately need is more artists. We talk a lot about building a livable future, but what does that really mean? Not much for those of us barely surviving today. Furthermore, I don't want a future that's merely livable. I want a beautiful world. I'm sick of nightmares, and I'm ready to dream again. I'd like to introduce to everyone the concept of world building. At its core, world building is what it sounds like, the process of creating an imaginary world for a world of fiction. It's the practice of taking the ideas in your head, the sensations from your imagination, and allowing people to see what you see, feel what you feel. It's as much about creating new things as it is about destroying old structures and assumption. It's an art, not a science. World building is often thought to be the domain of science fiction, but any work of fiction, or even non-fiction, requires it. You have to build the world as your character sees it, because as every novelist knows, world building is more about the characters than about the environment. And so it is in life. None of us experiences the world the same way, so we live in our own little versions of it. We need to apply world building to the planet we live on. And while artists might be the most accomplished at this, they can't do it alone. We are all going to have to push our imaginations. Here's one way to start. Close your eyes and think of the world as you see it. Remember that world building begins with the main character. That's you. So ask yourself, who are you and what do you stand for? And now, what do the people around you stand for? Picture your surroundings. Observe everything that's beautiful and everything that's ugly, scary, uncertain. The storms, the fires, the injustices, the screaming, the gnashing of teeth. As you consider your surroundings, including the laws of society and mores of culture, take note of how you feel in them, how you interact with them. Think about what you can change and what you can't. Open your eyes. Breathe. Now close your eyes and imagine the world you want to live in. You're starting with the same main character, still you, but maybe the people around you have changed. What do they value in this world? How do they treat each other? What's important in this new world? And what isn't? What does power, not just electricity, look like? How does the air feel on your skin? What does it smell like? In my world, there's laughter and lightness in the air, and it's not weighted down by those noxious chemicals that make my nose burn. Memorize your version. Every detail, every sensation. You'll need to keep coming back here until you make it real. When you open your eyes, ask yourself, is there something from that world I can bring into this one? That's your job now. If we're going to make the world over, let's do it right. Let's make a masterpiece. There you have it. Mary Anais Heglar is a climate writer and a co-host of the podcast Hot Takes. Again, this story was brought to you as part of Covering Climate Now, a global journalism collaboration co-founded by Columbia Journalism Review and The Nation to strengthen coverage of the climate story. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next time.
That's this week's episode of Best in Climate for Earth Feels.
Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. there's a mission for you and for me.